Chapter 2200. Stunning the whole audience. 3. The entire group of people were dumbfounded upon seeing Su Luo. What the hell? Who said this girl was a 7-star commander rank? Are you blind? Isn't it obvious that she's a 2-star saint rank? Impossible. I took a clear look at her aura a month ago, and it was definitely just a mere 7-star commander rank. I'm not wrong. Then what the hell is going on right now? Is her 2-star saint rank just an illusion? Crap. She's really a 2-star saint rank. What happened on Earth here? The person who had previously despised Su Luo for being a puny 7-star commander rank was speechless as he stared dumbfoundedly at Su Luo. Walking past the man, Su Luo looked back and directed a faint smile toward him before walking off elegantly. As the saying went, a beauty's smile was worth 1,001. These people were stunned by Su Luo's captivating face. Why do I feel that this girl is more attractive than Fairy Wu Yu? In the first place, she was already more beautiful than Fairy Wu Yu. Did your eyes finally start to work properly? Hey, now's not the time to praise how pretty she is. The current question is, how could Su Luo be promoted from the 7-star commander rank to 2-star saint rank in just a single month within the gravity chamber? That's theoretically impossible, you know? Didn't they agree on a life and death battle? That means that they must definitely have gone to the life and death battle stage. Go, 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 let's go and see the fun. Wouldn't it be a pity to watch such a wonderful match just by ourselves? Hurry up and inform your friends and relatives to go. Thus, all of these people took out their own communication amulets to send news about the matter to their friends. As masters, everyone had their own communication amulets, allowing them to contact people with ease. If it was a life and death battle between the rank 100th and the 75th on the dragon list, it might not have been a big deal. However, this was about the 100th place ranker on the dragon list, who had promoted 5 stars in just 1 month. Such a matter was more than capable of shocking the entire Genius Training Camp, because this was unprecedented in the Genius Training Camp. It was more than sufficient to set a new record. The life and death battle platform was not far from the gravity chamber. When Su Luo arrived, Lan Yin was already on stage. Although he was shocked by Su Luo's promotion speed, he was nonetheless still very confident after coming back to his senses. He thought that since he was still 2 stars stronger than Su Luo, he would be able to defeat her. On the stage, the two people stood opposite each other as winds ruffled the corners of their clothes. Below the stage, many people were busily engaged in discussion. No one was more shocked than people in Su Luo's team. That was because they had seen Su Luo's strength before. When Su Luo was only a 7-star commander rank, she had already taken over as the leader of their team, as her strength had surpassed everyone else. Now, after having promoted so many stars within a month, they were really looking forward to Su Luo's performance. Fairy Wu Yu also arrived. Lan Yin didn't have the face to see her at all. It was his rivals who notified him. A layer of soft snow-white fur was spread on the hard armchair. Fairy Wu Yu leaned half of her body on it, as she squinted her eyes, surveying the stage. 5 or 6 men stood behind her. It seemed that at any given moment, there would always be no fewer than 5 men surrounding her. At a time like this, these men would naturally take advantage of the situation to damage Lan Yin's reputation. Nonetheless, Lin Banli still had a bit of conscience, as he said. Lan Yin had been heavily poisoned before. This might be the reason why he didn't make much progress this time. Chapter 2201. Stunning the whole audience. 4. On the contrary, the unexpected one is Su Luo, who gained 5 stars in a whole month. Have you ever seen someone promote 5 stars in a month? Such a terrifying promotion speed. Only our Fairy Wu Yu. The man's words halted. That was because he realized that Wu Yu was in a bad mood. At this moment, Fairy Wu Yu swept a gloomy look towards that man before turning to stare deeply at Su Luo on the stage. 5 stars in a month? Within her sleeves, Wu Yu clenched her hands into fists. This Su Luo had utterly exceeded all of her expectations. Before coming here, she had assumed that she was going to win this bet. At the beginning, she saw Su Luo like a little ant that she could trample upon whenever she liked. However, who would have thought that Su Luo had actually possessed such potential? With her supernatural cultivation speed, it was difficult to guarantee that 1 year from now, if she could reach my current level. In the beginning, Fairy Wuyu didn't take Su Luo seriously. However, after seeing her supernatural speed at promoting, even she couldn't suppress the fear that slowly creeped up her heart. On the stage, Lan Yin was in a similar situation as he tried his utmost to hide the panic that was growing in him. Knowing him exceedingly well, Fairy Wuyu could tell in a single glance what he was feeling right now. Take it. Fairy Wuyu snorted softly. Then, a light blue shield flew towards Lan Yin. Many people's eyes snapped wide open upon seeing his shield, while the men standing behind Fairy Wuyu could not believe what they were seeing. Wooing Shield. This is Fairy Wuyu's favorite defensive weapon. Those who knew about it understood that in order to get this wooing shield, Fairy Wuyu had risked her life to bring a group of men to find it from a dangerous place. However, why did she just toss it out like that? People knew that the wooing shield had to recognize its owner. If Lan Yin was to use it, Fairy Wuyu had to first cancel the blood contract with the wooing shield before Lan Yin could be recognized as the new owner. Moreover, once Fairy Wuyu canceled the blood contract, she would not be able to form a contract with the wooing shield in the future. Many people were jealous to death. Fairy Wuyu really treats Lan Yin well. First, she gave him 10 million points, and now she gives him the wooing shield. Why do I feel that Fairy Wuyu is jealous of Su Luo and wants to use Lan Yin to get rid of her? This also means that Fairy Wuyu has already considered Su Luo her rival. This Su Luo is really lucky. What an honor it is to be regarded as the rival of Fairy Wuyu. With Lan Yin getting that wooing shield, Su Luo is bound to lose. Who told her to have the surname Su? This surname is not good at all. On the stage, a burst of joy filled Lan Yin's face upon receiving the wooing shield. He was originally worried about losing to Su Luo. However, now with the wooing shield, all of those worries had vanished. This time, he would definitely make sure Su Luo died by his sword. As he thought about this, Lan Yin raised his eyes, looking at Fairy Wuyu, and nodded solemnly. This indicated that he understood what Fairy Wuyu wanted him to do. At this moment, one of Fairy Wuyu's male admirers had already started peeling those crystal-like grapes and hand-feeding them in Fairy Wuyu's mouth. Fairy Wuyu gave a charming smile, giving a faint sign of confidence in Lan Yin's victory. At this moment, she seemed to be in a pretty good mood. However, Su Luo frowned slightly when she heard the discussion in the audience and saw Lan Yin's excitement, coupled with Fairy Wuyu's intention. So, what exactly was the strength of that so-called wooing shield? Chapter 2202. Stunning the whole audience. 5. Su Luo's lips slightly twitched. Are you not afraid of dying? You wench, don't forget that I'm 2 stars above you, and not to mention that I have the wooing shield now. Why would I be afraid of you? What a joke! Lan Yin said with extreme confidence. Really? Then, let's see what you're really made of. After saying that, Su Luo made the first move. She also wanted to try her 2-star saint rank strength. Su Luo put her hands together to make a seal, and soon a powerful ball of light surged, smashing towards Lan Yin. But the wooing shield stopped it. Boom! With a soft sound, the ball of light that Su Luo had formed was swallowed by the wooing shield and disappeared without a trace. Su Luo was taken aback for a moment, while Lan Yin smiled in triumph. And there was a further burst of laughter from the audience. Come on, come again. I'm going to see how you, Su Luo, can crack the wooing shield. Lan Yin put on a tortoise formation with the shield. He knew that because he was being attacked, he was already at a disadvantage, so he had to take defensive measures. The wooing shield could absorb any attacks that were at a lower rank, and Su Luo was only a 2-star saint rank. Even if she was strong, she couldn't possibly exceed a 4-star saint rank, right? Therefore, all of Su Luo's attacks would be swallowed by the wooing shield, and she would have no idea how to deal with Lan Yin. Lan Yin was waiting for her to get exhausted. Then he would take the offensive. The fireballs were no good, but what about the Chungying sword? Su Luo stretched out her right arm, and a cold scarlet sword appeared in the palm of her hand. Su Luo gripped the Chung Ing sword tightly and flew into the air. With 49 thrusts in a row, the sword gleamed, leaving no trace, and the audience was dazzled. But Su Luo became more surprised. Sure enough, as Lan Ningyan said, the wooing shield had withstood all her attacks, and Lan Ningyan was hiding behind it, so she couldn't hurt him at all. Ha ha, seeing Su Luo's furious look, Lan Ningyan felt very comfortable, and forcing her to give in, he felt that there would be nothing else that could make him happier. Su Luo, my wooing shield is pretty good, right? This strength you were using is not enough. Where did all that strength you previously showed go? Huh? Lan Ningyan was very proud. Fairy Wu Yu held the fragrant tea and took a sip with a smile on the corners of her crimson lips. She looked at Su Luo with the same scorn that she would give to ants. Ants, after all, were just ants and had nothing more than a moment of pride. As long as Fairy Wu Yu, made a move, how would I be unable to defeat them? Fairy Wu Yu thought that this scene was growing increasingly boring, and she was planning to go back to sleep after a bit. The direction of the wind beneath the stage also began to change. The people who first supported Su Luo also shook their heads. With the wooing shield, Lan Ningyan is immune to Su Luo's attacks, and she can't do any harm to him. Yeah, if one goes down, it would be Su Luo, who will definitely get exhausted, and by then she will be sure to lose. This is a life and death battle. If you lose, you die. It's a pity that a genius of this generation will fall like this. Countless people sighed and regretted for Su Luo. But at this moment, Su Luo still had a smile as faint as a breeze blowing without a trace through the water. Lose? That word had never existed in my world. At this time, Su Luo calmed down and stopped pursuing Lan Ningyan. Chapter 2203. Stunning the whole audience. 6. Su Luo bent her legs slightly, taking a stance on the life and death stage. At the same time, she condensed a small fireball in her hand. Huh, what is Su Luo doing? Does she want to use that small fireball to attack Lan Ningyan? When Fairy Wu Yu almost dozed off, the male pet next to her suddenly let out a chuckle. And so, Fairy Wu Yu looked towards the stage. Su Luo condensed a small, fist-shaped fireball, attempting to shoot it towards Lan Ningyan. The small fireball looked very ordinary. If it were special, it would be a bit darker than a normal flame. Did Su Luo really think that the small fireball could hurt Lan Ningyan? It was as if you were facing an elephant's attack, but using ants as a weapon to smash the elephant. She didn't know her own strength. How could I see Su Luo, who was like a straw bag, as my opponent? How could I even have been afraid of her? Fairy Wu Yu suddenly felt that she had been brainless. Many people in the audience felt that Su Luo wasn't in her right mind, and Lan Ningyan was even happier than a mouse. Su Luo had really attacked with that little fireball, but before it touched the wooing shield, the little fireball was pulled back as if it were attached to a rope. Then Su Luo condensed another small fireball, smashed it towards Lan Ningyan, and pulled it back before it touched the wooing shield. She repeated this multiple times, pulling them back over and over again, without touching the wooing shield at all. The small fireballs that were pulled back were not destroyed. 1, 2, 3, many small fireballs were collected by Su Luo. Of course, no one knew where Su Luo was hiding them. Well, what is she playing at? Yeah, is this a life and death battle or a show? This is the most trivial life and death battle I have ever seen. Many people were discussing this. Since Su Luo hadn't attacked, everyone urged Lan Ningyan to attack. However, Lan Ningyan was worried again. He felt that, although Su Luo was acting mysteriously, she had to have a reason for it. He didn't dare to attack, and only kept defending himself with the wooing shield. If I attacked, then wouldn't the wooing shield become useless? While Lan Ningyan was hesitating, everyone else was dozing off, and Fairy Wu Yu was lazily preparing to go back. Whoosh! Su Luo waved her hand. Instantly, numerous fireballs appeared in front of her. The fireballs lingered in front of Su Luo, densely packed, and there were hundreds of them. Lan Ningyan felt a little nervous, but forced himself to sneer bitterly. Do you think these little fireballs can penetrate the defense of the Wu Ying's shield? Su Luo smiled faintly. Maybe, maybe not. But it doesn't matter what you think. With a wave of her hand, hundreds of small fireballs began to merge at a speed visible to the naked eye. How? How could she have merged them so fast? Lan Yingyan was stunned, looking at Su Luo in awe, while his mind went blank. The people in the audience were also shocked. They may have previously thought that Su Luo would fuse only the smaller fireballs, but fusing was not a trivial matter, as it would consume spiritual energy. How was it possible that fusion could be completed in just a blink of an eye, as Su Luo had just done? It was a pity. They didn't know that, while suffering in Gravity Room number 13, Su Luo had integrated the fallen red lotus flame into her body, and now, her use of the fallen red lotus flame had reached the realm of her own will. Chapter 2204. Stunning the whole audience. 7. She was able to merge them together the very moment she wanted to combine them. As a result of the fusion, a big fireball quickly appeared in front of Su Luo. This oversized fireball was bigger than Su Luo's body, and it was still growing. At this moment, Lan Yingyan's face finally changed. Nevertheless, he still proceeded to console himself, thinking that it was all right, that the power of the Wu Ying's shield was incomparable, and that Su Luo would definitely not be able to break its defense. However, right at that moment, a cold and indifferent sneer curled up from the corner of Su Luo's mouth, as she said lightly, "Go." In the next instant, this massive fireball, which now towered over 3 stories high, started to roll forwards as smoke spewed out from it, appearing like a massive wave in the ocean, surging forwards with majestic might. Lan Yingyan kept backing off and backing off. He had the vague feeling that these flames were not as simple as they appeared to be. Nevertheless, the people in the audience didn't know, as they proceeded to shout one after another. "What are you afraid of? It's just an ordinary flame. You'll be fine even if it smashes into you." Was it really not a problem? Lan Yingyan felt that his back was soaked with sweat, his whole body turning pale and powerless as if he had been fished out of the rain. At this point in time, the edge of the battle platform was already right up against his back. Lan Yingyan attempted to fly up, but he found that his feet seemed to be frozen on the ground, unable to move even a single inch. He turned around and wanted to run, but he couldn't do it at all. Turning around was a cowardly move to do on the life or death stage, but he discovered that he couldn't move his body at all. Turning his head around, he looked at Su Luo and saw the smirk of triumph in her eyes. In an instant, he understood Su Luo was the one behind this phenomenon. Defense. Now, all he could do was to defend. Lan Yingyan rolled up his body into a tight clump while hiding behind the Wu Ying's shield. At this instant, everyone held their breaths and stared at the Wu Ying's shield. Everyone wanted to know whether the Wu Ying's shield could resist the attack of this huge fireball. Very quickly, the gigantic fireball made contact with the Wu Ying's shield. From past experiences, they knew that such a large fireball would be absorbed by the Wu Ying's shield, but this time, just when everyone held their breath and stared at the Wu Ying's shield with all their attention, they saw that the part of the big fireball approaching the Wu Ying's shield was actually swallowed by it. The Wu Ying's shield was frantically trying to absorb the fireball. However, as though it didn't feel a thing, the big fireball's original spherical shape surprisingly morphed into a long strip, going around the back of Lan Yingyan to encircle him like a fence. Ah! Scorching flame, super high temperature, hot burning pain. At the corner of the battle platform, Lan Yingyan and the Wu Ying shield were all wrapped in the big fireball. The only sight everyone could see was a large swath of flame and a large swath of red. The sharp screams from Lan Yingyan causing terror and panic to surge in people's hearts. Many people were stunned. No one had ever seen such an intelligent flame. Who had ever seen a spherical flame body turning into a firewall by itself? The IQ of this flame seemed to be higher than a human's being. It was very likely that nothing would bode well for Lan Yingyan this time. Many people let out a silent sigh in their hearts. A chilling glow burst forth from Fairies Wu Yu's beautiful eyes. The anger present in her eyes was clear to everyone. She had already crushed into pieces the white jade cup in her hand. Idiot! There was no telling who Fairy Wuyu was scolding. Not to mention the 10 million points that had gone down the drain. Even with the wooing shield that was given to him, he still managed to fail to this extent. Chapter 2205. Stunning the whole audience. 8. Just when Fairy Wuyu was about to lose her temper, the fire on the stage slowly dissipated. The entire stage was covered with scorch marks. There was nothing left of the place where Lan Yingyan once stood. Even his corpse was burned into black smoke that had dissipated without leaving a trace. My wooing shield. Fairy Wuyu stood up and roared loudly. Everyone then came back to their senses as well. That's right. Where was the wooing shield? Wasn't it still absorbing the flame just a moment ago? That was regardless of the fact that its absorbing speed wasn't that fast at all. Facing everyone's bewildered and confused gazes, Su Luo shrugged her shoulders and replied, perhaps it had the same fate as Lan Yingyan. What happened to Lan Yingyan? He was burned into black smoke. At this moment, everyone looked at Su Luo with a very complicated gaze. Lan Yingyan, who was ranked 75th on the dragon list, had unexpectedly been defeated by Su Luo, who had come from the midstream mountain less than a month ago. Did that mean that this stinky girl was now ranked at least 75th in strength? At this point, deep shock had appeared in the eyes of the people as they looked at Su Luo. One had to know that everyone within Genius Training Camp was a genius and were all blessed with great talent. It was very difficult to advance on the dragon list, as the people who ranked ahead never stepped down, so the people who ranked behind couldn't jump up. This was like a surging tide where everyone's strength was constantly rising, thereby resulting in the ranking becoming stagnant. However, that was not the case with Su Luo. She actually killed someone who was ranked 75th on the dragon list within such a short period of time. Of course, with Lan Yingyan dead, no one other than the 8th Elder knew that Su Luo had been practicing in room number 13 of the gravity chamber right before this fight. If this news was broadcasted, everyone might not just be surprised but shocked to the core. Fairy Wuyu stared at Su Luo with her beautiful eyes. In an instant, Fairy Wuyu felt an overflowing surge of fear rising from the bottom of her heart. In just a month's time, she had grown to this level. If it was a year later, she had to be killed as soon as possible. Fairy Wuyu glared at Su Luo and made up her mind. Having come to a decision, a chilling sneer suddenly appeared at the corner of Fairy Wuyu's mouth as she took a deep look at Su Luo. Then, she flicked her sleeves and fluttered away. The men behind her fiercely glared at Su Luo one by one, before crowding around the departing Fairy Wuyu. Thus, Lan Yingyan died just like that. Fairy Wuyu couldn't even say a word, much less shed a tear for him. Su Luo looked at the scorched edge of the battle stage and sighed softly, feeling it was a worthless death for Lan Yingyan. Nevertheless, curiosity piqued her heart. Was Fairy Wuyu really that popular among those men? What exactly did she rely on? If the answer was her charm, Su Luo really didn't think she had enough to make that many men fall under her skirt. When Su Luo took this question to Senior Brother Luo, Senior Brother Luo's face was immediately contorted. After shooting a deep stare at Su Luo quite for a while, he flung his sleeves and left. Su Luo. What exactly was going on? Was it because of the lack of women in Purgatory City? Su Luo wouldn't think so, even if she was beaten to death. Moreover, it seemed to be some kind of taboo for Senior Brother Luo. Su Luo stroked her chin and pondered curiously. In the end, Su Luo came to the conclusion. Could it be related to Fairy Wuyu's actions in bed? Chapter 2206. Stunning the whole audience. 9. Li Man Man circled around Su Luo, looking at her from top to bottom with eyes full of worship. Senior Brother Luo gave Li Man Man an angry look. You don't hate her anymore? Li Man Man shoved Senior Brother Luo. Since when did I hate her? Senior Brother Luo didn't answer. He just laughed, and the others in the team followed suit. On the trip to the magical beast zone before, hadn't Su Luo been thoroughly despised by Li Man Man? Wasn't it only until later on, when Su Luo displayed her own strength, that everyone began to admire her? Back then, they had already overestimated Su Luo and felt that her future prospects were limitless. But no one had expected that this time, Su Luo's strength would be so far beyond their expectations. Lan Yin, who was ranked 75th on the dragon list, had been killed by her, and there wasn't even a whole corpse left behind. This side of Su Luo was really eye-opening to them. Li Man Man had now completely changed her attitude and become Su Luo's little follower. Her appearance when she swore that she'd defend Su Luo to the death amused Su Luo. Right, Luo, class will start tomorrow, let's go together. Li Man Man took Su Luo's arm and coddled her. Su Luo blinked. Class? Yes. Every month, an elder will come over to give us lessons. Not only do we have theoretical knowledge, but there will also be practical competitions. If you perform well and are favored by the elders, you may be accepted as a direct disciple by that elder. Before, Lan Yin was chosen as a direct disciple by the 8th elder because of his talent. Li Man Man explained to Su Luo. Lan Yin was the disciple of the 8th elder. Su Luo frowned slightly. She originally thought that it was only Fairy Wu Yu who backed Lan Yin, so she hadn't been very concerned about killing him, but she hadn't expected the 8th elder to also be there. Su Luo felt that things were getting a bit tricky, because no master would watch his disciple get killed without batting an eye. Yes, Lan Yin was a disciple of the 8th elder, but the 8th elder likes to accept a lot of apprentices. Lan Yin was the least favored one, so don't worry too much about it, Luo. Li Man Man didn't take it seriously. However, Su Luo didn't think so. Although it is said that life and death are determined in the arena of life and death, and no one was allowed to settle any accounts afterwards, this mainly depended on the elder's decisions. Even if that was his least favored disciple, killing Lan Yin would still be like giving him a fierce slap to the face. If the elder was narrow-minded, then Su Luo would be in trouble. So Su Luo asked, I'm not acquainted with this 8th elder. What's he like? Senior brother Luo analyzed. It's rumored that the 8th elder has a good reputation and is generous. Since he particularly cherishes his reputation, he probably won't pursue this matter with you very much. Cherishes his reputation? Su Luo frowned. As far as she knew, people that were concerned with their reputation generally weren't very broad-minded. Who's coming to the class this time? Su Luo asked. Don't worry, it's not the 8th elder, but the 7th. Li Man Man smiled and said to Su Luo, Have you never been to a class? What the elders teach is their own experiences, which is crucial for our cultivation. It's very helpful, and it's not like anyone who wants to attend can attend. Oh, there are restrictions? It's not really a restriction, but a fee, Li Man Man explained. Everyone who enters the class needs to pay 100,000 points. Chapter 2207. Stunning the whole audience. 10. 100,000 points to attend a single class? Why doesn't he just go rob someone? Su Luo was speechless. The elders also need points, after all. Such a fee isn't very expensive. Besides, classes are only held once a month. Li Man Man said, but for Su Luo, who was extremely poor, it was still very expensive. Although she was holding the diamond token, the points she obtained had never been saved and were quickly spent. The points in her hand were probably just enough to pay for this one class. Let's go. We're all going. And the elders are likely to talk about the extraterritorial battlefield and the situation with the Mystic Clan. It would be such a waste not to go, Li Man Man said. Were there still Mystic Clan members in the extraterritorial battlefield? Su Luo's heart tightened when she heard those words. A long-lost name suddenly appeared in her mind. She remembered that her master had told her Yun Qi had entered the demonic path, and his strength had risen by leaps and bounds, and master wanted her and Nangong Luyun to be wary of him. It had been a long time since she had heard from Yun Qi. These days, both her and Nangong's strengths had risen a lot, but she still didn't know what Yun Qi's strength was now. If what master said was true, and the Mystic Clan would use the power of the whole family to assist him, then the situation was more terrible than she thought. Luo, what are you thinking about? When Li Man Man saw Su Luo dazed, not saying a word, she reached out and shook her. Okay, let's go to the class tomorrow. Su Luo smiled somewhat reluctantly. Not counting the 100,000 points for this course, she had to aim for 1,000,000 points, because she must understand the situation of the demons. Early next morning, Li Man knocked on Su Luo's door. Only Li Man had come with her from Luo Yichen's team, as the rest of them had planned to go to the magical beast zone to earn some points. Su Luo asked them to take Big Sister Wei along. She had the intelligence of a little kid, but her strength was very good and would not hold them back. The teaching class was held on the mountaintops. The towering mountains were endless. Its cliffs were steep and shot straight into the sky. If you want to listen to the class, you must go to the top of the mountain from here, because the class is held on the top of the cliff, Li Man explained to Su Luo. Su Luo raised her eyes and scanned around. It was still early at this time, but some students had already arrived in 2s and 3s. When they saw Su Luo, they were taken aback for a bit, but they still showed a good attitude towards her, smiling and nodding, and then leaped forward. The straight cliffs were tens of thousands of meters high, but they didn't use any tools to ascend, leaping up all the way, sometimes tapping the cliff with their arms and flying upwards with strength. It is worthy of being the top 100 students in the Genius Training Camp, since only they can do this kind of climbing. One must know how many times the pressure of this Genius Training Camp had increased compared to that on the mainland. That was the 65th ranked person on the dragon list just now. Li Man enthusiastically pulled Su Luo, expressing her excitement. The people here are very high-minded, so they usually ignore me. Good thing you are here. I wouldn't be able to beat the 65th ranked on the dragon list, Su Luo admitted. That's not necessarily true. But even if you can't beat them, it's only temporary. Who knew that you would be able to win against Lan Yingyan within a month? In short, now everyone knows that your talent and future are real, which is very remarkable. Li Man gave Su Luo a thumbs up. Chapter 2208. Stunning the whole audience, 11. Let's go up and take a look. Su Luo didn't say much and flew up with Li Man. Li Man was exhausted. However, with Su Luo by her side, she did not fall behind. Even Su Luo was panting slightly when she reached the top of the cliff, let alone Li Man. Li Man's cheeks were flushed as she collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. This cliff might as well have been a test. Su Luo felt that the monthly lecture didn't just teach theoretical knowledge. One could also benefit a lot just from climbing the cliff. On top of the cliff, they soon spotted a quaint palace up ahead. The old, quaint exterior walls had been worn out by rain and wind throughout the years. This place had seen quite some history. Let's go. Su Luo quickly pulled Li Man forward. After paying the points, Su Luo and Li Man entered side by side. Despite being located in the prestigious Genius Training Camp, the interior of the classroom reflected its exterior appearance. Rows of desks and chairs were neatly arranged. 2 desks were counted as 1 row. Although they arrived here quite early, there were already a few people sitting in the classroom. Being familiar with the rules and not wanting to draw attention to herself, Su Luo pulled Li Man to the corner of the emptiest row. Since Su Luo had just killed Lan Yingyan the day before, it was still fresh news. The people in the class glanced at Su Luo. However, regardless of the looks they gave her, Su Luo's expression was as calm as a tranquil lake, still and devoid of ripples. It made them become even more curious. That was because it was quite remarkable for one to have such a peaceful state of mind at her age. Just as a strange atmosphere suffused the entire classroom, a loud noise suddenly echoed from outside. Li Man's heart tightened, her face paled, her small hands clenched into fists, and she glanced at Su Luo apologetically. What's the matter? Su Luo felt a trace of regret in Li Man's eyes that seemed to show she was feeling remorseful for bringing Su Luo here. It's Fairy Wu Yu. Li Man frowned. The 7th elder is Fairy Wu Yu's master. Normally, she wouldn't waste time here listening to a lecture here, so it's extremely out of the ordinary for her to come here today. It was precisely due to her assumption that Fairy Wu Yu would not come that resulted in Li Man trying her best to encourage Su Luo to attend. However, the improbable had happened, and now Li Man was afraid that Fairy Wu Yu would bully Su Luo causing her to feel extremely uneasy. Su Luo patted her shoulder. "Don't worry, she can't do anything to me." Li Man nodded, though the worry in her heart still did not disappear. At this point in time, the clamoring noise had drawn closer, with the sound of footsteps ringing out clearly for all to hear. Soon, Fairy Wu Yu, surrounded by a group of people, walked in. Today, she was dressed in a gorgeous fiery red gown, with numerous accessories adorning her body, appearing luxurious and majestic. As she slowly walked, the light outside the window seemed to add a layer of brilliance to her, as though the sun wasn't as dazzling as her. Fairy Wu Yu, who possessed unparalleled beauty, was like a dazzling pearl or the brilliant starlight. Wherever she appeared, she would immediately become the center of attention. Su Luo, on the other hand, was wearing a plain pale yellow outfit with no accessories whatsoever. The only ornament she carried around was the silk waistband tied around her waist, fluttering gently in the wind. She, at first glance, didn't appear very special, but no one could ignore her existence. Chapter 2209. Stunning the whole audience. 12. Contrary to Fairy Wu Yu, Su Luo's beauty wasn't only her outer appearance, but also from her spiritual aura. Seeing Su Luo, Fairy Wu Yu's movements came to a momentary halt. A faint layer of gloomy coldness gleamed in her gorgeous eyes. Nevertheless, she did not deliberately stir up trouble. Instead, a ridiculing sneer surfaced on her face as she flung her wide sleeves, and she sat in the center seat of the class. That position was reserved exclusively for her. If she didn't come, it would be left vacant. Why did Fairy Wu Yu behave so ostentatiously? Was it because no one could beat her? There really wasn't anyone in this class who could do so. That was because all of the students ranked 50 to 100 on the dragon list were all gathered here. With Fairy Wu Yu ranked exactly number 50, she was rightfully ranked first in this class, so no one can be better than her. Why did Fairy Wu Yu come today? Isn't she a disciple of the 7th Elder? Is there any need for her to come here to listen to the class? Could it be that something happened? Haven't you noticed that Fairy Wu Yu is extremely hostile towards Su Luo? Looks like there will be a good show. A group of people lowered their voices and whispered. The lecture hall was not big, so everyone could easily hear the gossiping. Fairy Wu Yu raised her sharp white chin, and a cold smile hung at the corner of her mouth. Sitting like a majestic queen, she ignored everyone around her, though a happy glint flashed evidently across her eyes. This prophetic look clearly inflated her sense of superiority. However, the group of men around her continued to pamper her. Some gave her tea, some softly her back, and some massaged her legs. All of them hustled around, waiting on her like a queen. Soon, an old man paced slowly into the classroom. "Ah, 8th Elder?" In an instant, everyone let out a gasp. The person who came in was not the 7th Elder, but the 8th Elder. Was there a substitution? This was unprecedented. Everyone quickly looked over to the corner, where Su Luo was seated at. The 8th Elder's disciple Lan Yin was killed by Su Luo the day before. Today, the 8th Elder replaced the 7th Elder's class and had rushed over from the Elder Association Hall in person. Was there any meaning behind this? Many people quietly speculated. Although Fairy Wu Yu didn't look back at Su Luo, the malice in her eyes was obvious. She didn't hide the sneer on her mouth. She already knew that the 8th Elder would replace the 7th Elder. This was the result of her interference, after all. At this time, the 8th Elder had already walked up to the podium. Su Luo's eyes gazed toward the face of the 8th Elder. The 8th Elder wasn't very old. He looked just over 50. He was dressed in a blue robe and radiated a dignified aura. Su Luo's gaze met the 8th Elder's, and sparks flew. The 8th Elder's eyes narrowed as his eyebrows creased, but he retracted his gaze. At this moment, Su Luo's heartstrings grew tight, as it seemed that her hunch was right. After Lan Yin was killed, the 8th Elder now definitely held a grudge against her. Ahem dash, the 8th Elder waved his hand, and the students went silent. Compared to the 7th Elder, the 8th Elder had always kept a majestic and harsh figure, punishing people without mercy. Therefore, when he waved his hand, no one dared to say a word. Today, I will teach in the place of the seventh elder. Please rest assured that the subject will not change. The subject will still be about the wars between the outside world and the demons, and the abnormal changes in the fire element, the eighth elder said tersely. Chapter 22:10. Stunning the whole audience. 13. The eighth elder swept a glance over Fairy Wu Yu, and then calmly said, "As for the seventh elder, these few days are a critical period for his promotion, so he cannot be disturbed, let alone come out to teach." Wow dash, everyone exclaimed. Is the seventh elder going to be promoted again? So quickly. Although the seventh elder was ranked lower, his strength was still very high among the elders. As soon as he was promoted, his status would also rise. As a result, everyone clapped their hands to Fairy Wu Yu in congratulations. When Fairy Wu Yu was in the inner purgatory city, she had taken the third elder as her master. After entering the genius training camp, she took the seventh elder as her master instead. Faced with everyone's admiration, Fairy Wu Yu smiled faintly, as if the person who had been promoted and reached a breakthrough was her. In fact, it was almost the same thing. Since the seventh elder was so good to Fairy Wu Yu, wasn't it as if they were the same person? If it weren't for the seventh elder protecting her from the inside like this, could Fairy Wu Yu be so arrogant? When Li Man whispered this to Su Luo felt her head swell with annoyance. The seventh elder favored Fairy Wu Yu so greatly. In other words, the seventh elder had, no doubt, taken her as an enemy. Su Luo felt slightly embarrassed to cause the seventh elder and the eighth elder to pay so much attention to her, one after another. Soon, the eighth elder began to teach. Everyone should have heard of the extraterritorial battlefield, but you don't yet have the qualifications to enter it. You are all below the 50th place on the dragon list right now, so you will only have the right to go to the extraterritorial battlefield when you enter the top 50. As for the extraterritorial battlefield, what is it? As the name suggests, it is a vast battlefield. How vast? Vast to the point of being endless. Once you reach the top 50 on the dragon list and are still in the genius training camp, you can no longer maintain rapid improvement. Only once you go to the extraterritorial battlefield will you be able to keep making progress, because there are countless enemies out there who can provide you with more experience. Speaking of enemies, I have to mention the creatures there. In the extraterritorial battlefield, our greatest enemies are the creatures from different dimensions. You must all find this very strange. Where exactly did these beings come from? The answer is actually that simple. In fact, this blue sky continent where we live now is only one physical dimension. Within the entire universe, there are thousands, possibly even tens of millions of physical dimensions like ours. We are actually very small. To make a comparison, if the entire universe is a sea, then our blue sky continent is just a single drop of water. Wow! As the eighth elder slowly lectured, when it came to this moment, everyone in the entire class sucked in a breath of cold air. What? The blue sky continent where everyone lived was that small? As tiny as a drop of water in the sea? This realization made everyone's eyes full of disbelief and all kinds of shock. The eighth elder waved his hand. The reality is exactly this. There is nothing to be so shocked about. In contrast to everyone's shock, Fairy Wu Yu was very calm. She apparently had known about this from the start. When Su Luo heard this, she clasped her hands tightly and then smiled bitterly. If it hadn't been for the eighth elder telling them, she really wouldn't have known that the continent they were on was not the ultimate continent and was merely just a drop in the ocean. Chapter 22:11. Stunning the whole audience. 14. The eighth elder calmly scanned the shocked gazes in the lecture hall, and then continued. Rest assured, you don't have to worry about all the monsters from the different dimensions pouring into our homeland, because the material planes are not completely opened up, but are connected in twos. For example, our blue sky continent is only connected with the mystic clans. Isn't there a place where masters gather? For example, a place where the powerhouses of all material planes gather together? Fairy Wu Yu asked. According to the legend, There is indeed such a place. The eighth elder looked out the window, gazing at the vast clouds and mountains, his mind wandering far away, and a trace of melancholy appeared on his face back then. There was almost no one who could get there. Why? Fairy Wu asked again on behalf of the entire class. That place is called the spirit world. The eighth elder showed a hint of reminiscence. From our material plane to the spirit world, the spatial distance is so far away that we can't even calculate it. Then we just keep walking. There will always be an end to even the longest roads. Fairy Wu said solemnly. But what if you can't even get out of the door? The eighth elder smiled bitterly. In front of us, this material dimension is like a big cloth bag that is sealed in all directions, and the only exit is the place where the bag is tied. That is the only weakness, but no one knows where that place is on the mainland, so aside from entering the plane of the Mystic Clan, we can't get out at all. Don't we even have a single clue? Another classmate asked. No, it's not that there are no clues. The eighth elder pondered and said, as long as you find the map of the secluded necropolis of the gods, by finding all 4 map fragments and piecing together a complete map of the secluded necropolis of the gods, you can find the exit that will connect this material plane to the spirit world. Map of the secluded necropolis of the gods? Su Luo, who had been listening with intent, was suddenly filled with excitement and almost stood up. If it were not for being reminded of this by the eighth elder, Su Luo would have forgotten about this matter. She had the map fragments of the secluded necropolis of the gods. She had them. According to legend, the map of the secluded necropolis of the gods had 4 fragments, but she already had 3 pieces lying in her space. One piece was from a long time ago, when Su Luo sneaked into the treasure pavilion of the Su mansion and found it by accident. Another piece was sent to Su Luo by Zi Yin after breaking the Tianling cup of Li family in Yaoqi. The third piece was given to her by Master Rong Yun. In that case, as long as she found one more piece, would she be able to put together a complete map of the secluded necropolis of the gods? Thinking of this, Su Luo couldn't help but fidget. At this time, the eighth elder was still teaching about this puzzle. The whole class, including the eighth elder, did not know that one of the girls in their class had already accidentally collected 3 of the map fragments of the secluded necropolis of the gods right under their noses. The eighth elder continued, but no one knows where the secluded necropolis of the gods is, and there is no way to sense it. Whether it can be found is entirely by chance, and even more outrageous. Even if someone has already collected 3 pieces, as soon as they die, the map fragments of the secluded necropolis of the gods would be scattered to the corners of the continent. The eighth elder shook his head. So, it is very, very difficult to collect the 4 map fragments of the secluded necropolis of the gods. It is said that, so far, there have been no more than 3 men who have managed to leave the mainland. Chapter 22:12. Stunning the whole audience. 15. Standing right under the stage, Fairy Wu Yu's hands were clenching her hands into fists. Spirit world, that place definitely might have even more handsome, even better virtuous men. She had to go there. Her beauty couldn't be wasted on this small little blue sky continent. At the same time, Su Luo's horizons had also been opened up, widening her perspective. Originally, her goal had been to rank number 1 on the dragon list. But after hearing what the eighth elder said, she was extremely curious about this mysterious spirit world. At this time, the eighth elder turned back to his main topic. In fact, this information is considered to be highly confidential, and people at your level shouldn't have access to it, but the circumstances right now are different from what it used to be. The eighth elder gazed deeply at the people under the podium. Your upperclassmen are all putting their lives on the line, fighting the Mystic Clan at the extraterritorial battlefield. The few graduates from our genius training camp, all of them are also risking their lives for the battle. But lately, the situation there has been getting worse, and the rate of survival has been decreasing. What happened? Fairy Wu frowned. In the past year or 2, the Mystic Clan has been united as never before, especially in this past year. There was obvious despair in the eighth elder's eyes as he said, It is said that there is a new young leader in the Mystic Clan who's both incredibly talented and cunning. Many of our strong fighters have already died in his hands. With the rise of this new leader in the Mystic Clan, their strong soldiers are growing by the day, while ours are decreasing drastically. If this situation continues on, it will be difficult to predict our future. The Eighth Elder's heavy eyes gaze down at the students. You must grow up quickly to protect our continent from being trampled by the Mystic Clan. Protect our continent from being bullied by the Mystic Clan. Everyone under the podium said in unison. Yes. The Eighth Elder was satisfied with the reactions coming from everyone in the class. But when his glance swept over Su Luo, his eyebrows raised. Because Su Luo didn't follow everyone in saying these words. At this moment, Su Luo's brows were furrowed, and her face was wrinkled into the shape of a little bitter gourd. Furthermore, her gaze seemed to be drifting. Vacancy didn't seem to be listening to him. The Eighth Elder felt as if his authority was being disrespected. And so, he glared viciously at Su Luo. Su Luo seemed completely oblivious to Eighth Elder's furious glance, because at this moment her mind was completely focused on his words. Mystic Clan, a new leader. Was he Yin-Shi? What if he was Yin-Shi? If he was really Yin-Shi, then, in the quiet classroom, Su Luo suddenly raised a question. Eighth Elder, do you know who the new leader of the Mystic Clan is? Everyone looked at Su Luo as if they were looking at an idiot. This was the extremely prestigious leader of the Mystic Clan, the Mystic Clan's most powerful person. How would the Eighth Elder know his name? Was Su Luo trying to joke around? But the Eighth Elder's answer was entirely beyond everyone's expectations. The new leader of the Mystic Clan is called Yin-Shi. The Eighth Elder calmly said, Yin-Shi. So, it really was Yin-Shi. Su Luo sucked in a heavy breath of cold air. Even though she had previously already guessed this, now that it was confirmed, she still found it difficult to accept the truth. How much time had it been? How could Yin-Shi have already become the new leader of the Mystic Clan? If he really was the new leader of the Mystic Clan, wasn't he most likely extremely powerful? Exactly how strong was he? These kinds of questions were floating through Su Luo's mind endlessly. The Eighth Elder fixed his gaze on Su Luo, as if he expected something from her myriad of expressions. Chapter 22:13 Exaltation 1. But by this moment, Su Luo had already recovered her calm and indifferent state, so the Eighth Elder was naturally unable to tell that she had been shocked. He only saw Su Luo smile faintly. If so, then may I ask, how does the strength of the Eighth Elder compare to this new leader of the Mystic Clan? All of the students looked at Su Luo with complicated gazes. This female student was truly bold with her question. How was the Eighth Elder supposed to answer this? Unexpectedly, the Eighth Elder seemed very open with Su Luo, and he coldly smiled. The leader of the Mystic Clan, how is he someone who this old man can compare to? This girl, are you mocking me? I don't dare to, Su Luo said smilingly. Even though her face was smiling on the surface, she was shocked in her heart. Yin-Shi hadn't been very strong. He couldn't be compared to Nangong Luyin at all. But he had become this strong just within the past few years. And now the king was returning one. Su Luo's brows furrowed even deeper. The Eighth Elder, however, seemed to not care about Su Luo and continued his lecture. We were talking about the Mystic Clan, but now we are going to move on to the main topic of today's lecture. The Eighth Elder stood in the center of the podium, fixedly sweeping a glance over the disciples in the class. The Seventh Elder had already set the topic of the lecture as the variations of the fire element. Hence, we're going to discuss that topic today. Everyone knows, among all the elements, people who possess fire elements are the greatest in number. As for you all seated here, everyone has fire elements. You also know, aside from the most common fire elements, there are also high-class fire elements. From highest to lowest, they are spiritual fire, mystic fire, and metamorphosis fire. Among those of you seated here, there are a few who have mystic fire and metamorphosis fire. With these words from the Eighth Elder, many people in the class subconsciously swept a glance towards Su Luo. For her to be able to simply use fire elements to kill Lan Yingyan, she probably had mystic fire, or even metamorphosis fire. Who knew that she was unexpectedly hiding so many secrets? The eighth elder also glanced at Su Luo, then continued. But if you think that these 3 types of fire elements are already the highest classes, then you are wrong. Dead wrong. The eighth elder's eyes brightened, and he became a lot more excited. Spiritual fire, mystic fire, metamorphosis fire are all ordinary ranks of fire. The meaning is in the words. These fire elements belong to the ordinary world. Even if they could be strong, how strong could they get? In fact, there is another type of fire element. Its power is enough to destroy anything. There are no words to describe how powerful this type of fire element is the magical fire. Magical fire. Everyone raised their brows. They had never heard of this type of fire element before. It's only expected for you to not know of this. The eighth elder faintly smiled. This is the strongest fire element ever created by heaven and earth. Its name is the fallen red lotus. It is the purest type of fire element, extremely smart and well hidden from ordinary humans. Regarding its location, there is basically no one who knows. This type of fire element seems to belong only in legends. Su Luo was again stunned. It was too much of a coincidence that she was attending this lecture today. Not only had she learned about heaven for all strong cultivator spirit world, she had also learned about news of Yun Shi and the extraterritorial battlefield. Now she was learning about the secluded necropolis of the gods, and then the fallen red lotus. Why did she feel as if this lecture was designed specifically for her? However, no one could hear Su Luo's internal exclamations, and the eighth elder was patiently lecturing his attentive students. If you think that this fallen red lotus, the magical fire eyes, only slightly stronger in terms of attack, then you are extremely wrong. When the fallen red lotus reaches maturity, then it can even create its own fire world. Chapter 22:14 Exaltation 2. The eighth elder said, that world could be so wide, so endless, so vast, it could even be bigger than the entire blue sky continent. That world could give birth to new lives with fire elements. There could be fire humans, fire beasts, even fire mountains and lava rivers. It is an unimaginable world for humans. Furthermore, it can create its own fire principles, even higher level than the dimensions of the blue sky continent. A personally built world, that was to say one would be the god of that world. What a desirable thing it would be. Everyone was almost drooling at the thought of owning their own world. Eighth Elder, where is that magical fire? Exactly. Eighth Elder, there must be some kind of clues. If that magical fire belongs to the first few elements born between heaven and earth, then could it already be taken by someone else? Many people were so excited that they almost slammed the table. Su Luo looked at those people, then quietly looked down. Where else could the fallen red lotus be? It had long ago fallen into her pocket. But the interest of the eighth elder hadn't yet decreased, and he said, from the ancient times till now, no one knows where the fallen red lotus is. This opportunity falls on you guys, the young people, to discover it. The chance of discovering the magical fire is equivalent for each one of you. Having introduced the fallen red lotus, the eighth elder continued explaining the method of drawing energy from the essence of fire elements as well as the formulas. But at this time, Su Luo wasn't paying attention to the lecture. Because she had received too much information during this lecture, up to now, she was still trying to process it all. Suddenly, Su Luo's communication amulet vibrated, startling her. She quickly found out that this time it wasn't the green communication amulet, the one vibrating, meaning that Nangong Luyun was communicating with her. Thinking of Nangong Luyun, Su Luo was unable to sit still. At this moment, Su Luo's eyes looked earnestly at the eighth elder, straightening her back. She looked like an extremely studious disciple, but in reality, her soul had already flown into the space and was happily picking up the communication amulet. This time, Nangong Luyun wasn't only sending a text message, he was calling her. Su Luo immediately complained. Are you that busy? Why do you never reply to any of my messages? Su Luo sent updates to Nangong Luyun every day, but he rarely replied to her. Do you really miss me that much? Nangong Luyun's tired voice brought a hint of warm smile with it, transferring clearly to her side. In these situations, Nangong Luyun would always pat her small head or pinch her cheeks. But now that they were so far away from each other, he felt regretful that he was unable to do it. Narcissism is a type of illness. You must get it treated thoroughly. Su Luo lay on the variant red acacia tree, barefoot and basking in the sunshine. With her eyes half closed, she looked extremely comfortable. Ah, if you don't say you miss me, I won't marry you. Nangong Luyun was playing hard to get. Hey, you say that as if I really want to be married to you. Take a look in the mirror. Su Luo was angered by his deliberate attempt at taking advantage of her. Nangong Luyun's thin red lips were raised into a happy smile, and his handsomeness bloomed like a snowflake in the winter, extremely captivating. It seemed like he was enjoying Su Luo's angry emotions toward him, and the smile in his eyes lingered for a long time. If you don't marry me, no one else will dare to marry you. Nangong Luyun's smile deepened, and his jade eyes, as deep as the ocean, also carried the trace of a faint smile. That expression on him, that seemed certain of victory, was as if he was playing with a cute little pet. Chapter 22:15 Exultation 3 Su Luo unknowingly used an advertising slogan. You really shouldn't be so calm. There are at least 700 million people who want to marry me, and combined together, they could circle the earth twice. Nangong Luyun burst out laughing. However, Su Luo's next sentence made him unable to continue laughing. For example, there is one named Yun Shi. Su Luo mentioned this name seemingly carelessly. Nangong Luyun's sudden silence felt as though the whole world had fallen silent. Su Luo's heart was slightly conflicted. She knew that Yun Shi had always been a knot between the two of them, but she had initially thought that with his departure, this knot would disappear with time. Now, Yun Shi had become a big and powerful leader of Demon Clan, returning as a king and blossoming amidst dazzling light. So this was not something she and Nangong Luyun could ignore even if they wanted to. Su Luo knew that there was always a restraining balance in the relationship between heaven and earth, and so she had a certain premonition. For Yun Shi's strength to source so much in this short period of time, he must have paid a big price. And since he had paid such a big price to become stronger, would he let her go? Would he let go of Nangong Luyun? Are you still there? Su Luo asked tentatively. A cold voice responded. Today, it was only when the 8th elder mentioned Yun Shi that I learned that he had become the Demon Clan king. But in fact, you already knew about this, right? Su Luo's impression of Nangong Luyun had always been omnipotent and sure of victory. Your elders are quite boring, refusing to give proper lessons, specializing in talking about these nonsense things, defiling people's ears. Nangong Luyun had a disgusted look. I also think that Su Luo and Nangong Luyun, these two people, happily complained about the 8th elder. Then, right at this moment, the eyes of the whole class fell on Su Luo. Li Man's hand under the desk poked Su Luo, but the latter was only concerned with chatting with Nangong Luyun and did not react at all. Under the gaze of the class, Su Luo's body sat upright, her gaze straight ahead and her eyelids motionless, as well-behaved as a puppet on a string. But everyone knew that her mind had long wandered off. The 8th elder's eyes flashed with a cold light as he went down the podium, walking step by step towards Su Luo. Li Man couldn't really allow Su Luo to get caught by the 8th elder, right? When the time came, punishment would be inevitable. And so she lifted her toes and stepped on Su Luo fiercely. Clang! Su Luo's communication amulet fell to the ground. In the next instant, her soul floated out of space. This was an instinctive reaction when encountering danger. Seeing Su Luo's eyelids move, Li Man hurriedly gestured for Su Luo to stand up. Only then did Su Luo realize that she had become the focus of the whole class, and that everyone was happily gloating at her. When caught red-handed, according to the reaction of normal people, they would be embarrassed and blushing, right? But Su Luo's reaction was to remain very calm, and one could only see her unhurriedly stand up, her gaze calmly and elegantly looking directly at the eighth elder with a trace of doubt in her eyes. At this moment, the gloating in the eyes of Fairy Wu Yu was the most obvious. Hey, little girl, isn't your fire element attribute very powerful? You won't be unable to answer this question, right? What question? Su Luo's heart was confused, but on the surface, she pretended to be calm, the corners of her mouth containing a shallow and faint smile. Go and solve the question. The eighth elder's indifferent eyes swept past Su Luo's face. In all his years of teaching, he had never met anyone who dared to drift off in class. If Su Luo couldn't solve the question this time, she would end up miserably. Chapter 22:16, Exaltation 4. However, this question. Many people saw the question on the blackboard and shook their heads. Use the formula to calculate the fastest speed to extract fire energy from a higher fire element. Such a question would require at least a ranking in the top 50 of the dragon list to answer, right? Among them, even Fairy Wu would find this very tricky, right? But just now, when the eighth elder asked this question, Fairy Wu directly stood up and recommended Su Luo, and the students did not object. After all, a dead friend is still one. For someone to come out to bear the burden was the best outcome. What to do? This question is so difficult, Li Man said in a low voice. If you can't answer it, not only will you lose face, but you will also have to go to the eighth elder as an errand girl for 100 days. You must answer it. Ah! Su Luo was about to raise her feet to walk away, but then stopped. 100 days as an errand girl for the eighth elder? What kind of rule was this? Su Luo really couldn't understand this. Su Luo's question immediately caused the class to burst into laughter. No way? Su Luo didn't even know about this rule. She shouldn't be so close-minded, right? How long has she been in Upstream Mountain? A month or so, right? This is the first time she has come to the classroom to listen to a lesson, so she wouldn't know this. This is interesting. Su Luo killed the eighth elder's disciple. This is immediately pushing herself to the eighth elder to do hard labor for him. These 100 days, even if the eighth elder doesn't do anything, his disciples will not leave Su Luo with her little life. Although these words were whispered, the classroom was only so big, and so naturally, everyone heard them clearly. It was only at this moment that Su Luo realized that the consequences of not answering questions correctly in class were so serious. How could such a thing exist? Su Luo's gaze slowly landed on the face of the Fairy Wu Yu, whose eyes were also facing Su Luo at that moment. The two people's eyes met in the air, and silent flames seemed to flicker with a flash of lightning and thunder, shocking the crowd into a moment of silence. Little girl, if you can't solve the problem, you don't need to go up. Do you want your sister to help you plead with the eighth elder? Fairy Wu Yu had a charming attitude that enchanted people. Su Luo smiled lightly. This was a good plan to borrow the eighth elder's hand to get rid of her, but she would not give Fairy Wu Yu the opportunity to do this. Su Luo pretended to be at a loss. Is senior sister Wu Yu very familiar with the eighth elder? Does the eighth elder follow the words of senior sister Wu Yu? Su Luo's big, clear eyes were black and white, pure and innocent, fluttering, as pure as an unearthly little white rabbit, confused and uncomprehending. She seemed to be asking if Fairy Wu Yu had an improper relationship with the eighth elder, but with Su Luo's pure and harmless little look, one would feel that they were overthinking and thinking too badly of the little girl. The crowd was collectively speechless. The eighth elder's face flashed with a hint of irony. Fairy Wu Yu had always been unscrupulous, but the object of her unscrupulousness did not include the group of elders. What are you babbling about? You want to die? Fairy Wu Yu roared at Su Luo. Su Luo stuck out her tongue innocently. What's wrong with you, senior sister Wu Yu? We're all students of the Grand Elder. Aren't you a student of the eighth elder? Why are you so squeamish about this relationship? Chapter 22:17, Exultation 5. Su Luo knew when it was time to quit. Seeing her like this, she immediately hopped to the blackboard like a white rabbit would do. Looking at Su Luo's back, Fairy Wuyu was so mad that she huffed and puffed with anger. However, seeing Su Luo standing still in front of the blackboard, a peculiar sneer curled up at the corner of Fairy Wuyu's mouth. "Val Winch, if you can't solve the problem, you are dead." She had admirers present within the 8th Elder's disciples. With just a casual word from her, crushing Su Luo to death would be as simple as crushing an ant. The whole class looked at Su Luo with sympathetic gazes. Although they could only see Su Luo's back, they could imagine how helpless, anxious, and tangled Su Luo's face was at this moment. Why didn't she pay attention in class? Out of everyone, why did she have to offend Fairy Wuyu? Look, wasn't she looking for death? At this time, Su Luo's eyes stayed focused on the blackboard as she was looking at the very complicated question. Do I have to solve this problem? Had it been before, this question would be really difficult for Su Luo. She would have definitely scratched her ears, cheeks, and broken into a cold sweat if facing the difficult problem. However, since she had merged the fallen red lotus flame into her body while training the gravity chamber room number 13, Su Luo had developed an unprecedented understanding and comprehension towards the fire element. It was a kind of an instinctive understanding, as though it was ingrained in her. With that, Su Luo picked up the white chalk, faced the dark green blackboard, and started to write. Su Luo had never learned those formulas before. However, there was a kind of talent that was born with one's body, another kind of talent called the integration of knowledge, and another kind of talent called ascension to the top. Ever since Su Luo had merged with the first cluster of flames born between heaven and the earth, her comprehension of the fire properties had naturally reached integrated knowledge, and might have even reached ascension to the top. Screech, screech, screech. The tip of the chalk rubbed against the dark green blackboard, causing faint scratching sounds to ring out. Thought-provoking and elegant-looking words appeared in a uniform line. At this moment, Su Luo seemed to have fallen into an unprecedented state of seriousness, as though she was the only one existing in this entire classroom. More than that, it was as if she was the only one left in the world. Her surroundings were incomparably quiet in her ears, with the whole world becoming silent. Screech! Su Luo finally finished her line. She then proceeded to toss the chalk into the tiny wooden box with a confident stance. After that, Su Luo took her own sweet time to walk slowly and carelessly, taking step after step back to her place. At this moment, the entire classroom was silent. No one dared to breathe, as they were filled with shock from looking at the script written all over the blackboard. This handwriting is really good. As for whether it was right or wrong, looking at Fairy Wuyu's distorted and hideous expression on her face, with hands clenched into fists, you could tell a thing or two. The bottom of the 8th Elder's eyes were as dark as ink, as profound and unpredictable as the cold blue ocean. He looked at the blackboard with a single glance at the neat and flowing script, nodded slightly, and said, "The answer is correct." Snap! The pen in Fairy Wuyu's hand was crushed by her own force. The 8th Elder turned a blind eye to that, glanced at her with indifference, and walked to the lecturing platform to explain to everyone. Although the 8th Elder explained in detail, most people still looked confused after he finished. When the 8th Elder explained for the second time, half of them still didn't understand. Chapter 22:18, Exultation 6. It was till this moment that everyone's gaze towards Su Luo really changed. What a difficult question. The 8th Elder had to explain it 3 times, but there were some people who still couldn't understand it. Yet Su Luo, a person who had only been in the upstream mountain for more than a month, was able to write such a complete answer, with not the slightest mistake being made. How far was this girl's understanding of the fire element? At the beginning, everyone was still guessing whether she would be sent to the 8th Elder to do bitter labor if she couldn't answer the question. Now, thinking back about that, they realized how ridiculous the idea was. How utterly naive. At this time, everyone turned their attention to Fairy Wuyu. No one was blind. They could see that Fairy Wuyu had tried her best to recommend Su Luo to answer this question just now. Now that she answered it so well, was she actually trying to harm or help Su Luo here? Those people who already disliked Fairy Wuyu didn't bother to conceal the gloating smile shown from the corners of their mouth, with some of them even bursting into laughter. Fairy Wuyu was so angry that steam was about to spew out from the top of her head, as she turned around and glared viciously at Su Luo. She had never suffered from such a terrible loss, as she was always held up and protected since young. Su Luo smiled brightly at Fairy Wuyu. Her smile made the latter even more furious that blue veins popped out on her forehead. Su Luo then sat straight up, diverting all of her attention again, as she started to chat sweetly and happily with Nangong Luyan. Seeing Su Luo in a daze, Fairy Wuyu wanted to make her answer questions several times, but when she thought of Su Luo's understanding of the fire element, she huffed and puffed, forcing that urge down. Regarding Su Luo's performance, the classmates secretly gave their thumbs up. Newborn calves were not afraid of tigers. This little girl was too strong. After being caught in a daze in the class of the 8th Elder, she still dared to do it again. However, this time the 8th Elder and Fairy Wuyu had both waved the white flag and did not deliberately make things difficult for Su Luo. No one knew what 8th Elder's thoughts were. As for Fairy Wuyu, she had already begun to think about how to take Su Luo down and make her suffer a crushing humiliation. A short time after, the 8th Elder on the podium finished speaking, leaving with a sentence, "The lecture ends here. We will have a practical class next." It was the Elder who had the final say on how long or short a class would be, or if it would be divided into several subsections or not. There was even an Elder who came up with 7 days and 7 nights class sections, driving crazy the students in that class. Tell me, how many subclasses will the 8th Elder be splitting this class into this time? Someone asked in a low voice. Isn't the 8th Elder not happy with Su Luo? Maybe he will let us go back after the afternoon practical class. That's a big loss. We've paid 100,000 points each. It's not easy to save so many points. Who made you unlucky enough to meet Su Luo in the class? That girl is also very beautiful, but she is not popular and makes enemies everywhere. Isn't it because she is so good-looking that she was regarded as an enemy by others? She might be feeling helpless about it, right? Someone was finally willing to say something fair for Su Luo. Anyway, this girl is not forbearing enough to hold herself back under the ostentatious behavior of Fairy Wuyu. Look at it. There will definitely be a good show in this afternoon's practical class. Chapter 2219, Exaltation 7. The practical class was not far from there, and they arrived within a few minutes of walking. This was a wide and spacious grassy area, and there were no objects blocking the sight when you looked around. The grass present was lush and soft as a mattress. However, there were 72 targets placed on the grass. The construction of those targets were similar to those used in archery, with the only difference being that those targets had in the middle a hole as small as the eye of a needle. If not carefully observed, it was easy to overlook it. Su Luo looked with curiosity at these strange targets, speculating on how the lesson was going to proceed. Su Luo swept her gaze around and found that many people were similarly unsure of what to make out of those targets, so she guessed that this test was going to be conducted for the first time. At this time, Fairy Wuyu, surrounded by a group of people, strode over in a grandiose manner. Fairy Wuyu seemed to always be surrounded by people flattering her, brimming her surroundings with a queenly aura. Fairy Wuyu halted as she passed by Su Luo. Just like a peacock with an open tail fan, she raised her sharp and gleaming chin proudly as she casted a sidelong glance at Su Luo. Su Luo stood calmly, looking back with an ambiguous smile. No matter how much more powerful her enemies were, Su Luo would always face them with a calm and relaxed expression, neither humble nor overbearing, as if she wasn't even afraid of the sky falling on her. Every time, she seemed to be very lucky to escape a calamity and avoid a disaster. Su Luo had once again come into loggerheads with Fairy Wu Yu. Not only did the onlookers refuse to persuade the former, a green glow of gossip proceeded to burst forth from their eyes. Each of them glanced several times at Su Luo and Fairy Wu Yu, before lowering their heads to whisper among them. Seeing this, Fairy Wu Yu snorted and gave a huge fling to her wide sleeve, before throwing a sentence toward Su Luo. This test. Dare to bet? The corners of Su Lu's lips pursed. Does Fairy Wu Yu like gambling that much? The one-year contract has yet to arrive. So it turns out that you are afraid? Fairy Wu Yu shot a provocation back. The content of the last lesson. Fairy Wu Yu should have already heard someone talk about it beforehand, right? Su Luo replied. However, these words made more anger burst forth in Fairy Wu Yu's heart. This vile wench was able to see that. Naturally, her master had already taught her, though she only understood half of it. It was only after reading Su Luo's complete solution that she managed to fully understand. When Fairy Wu Yu thought that she was inferior to Su Luo, her face went tense. Do you dare to bet or not? All right, since Fairy Wu Yu wants to lose this badly, then please place your bet. Su Luo shrugged her shoulders while a look of reluctance appeared on her face. Compared to Su Luo, Li Man was standing beside her, brimming with anxiousness and almost unable to contain herself from signaling her thoughts to the former. This was a practical class, not a theory class. So what if Su Luo had good understanding in theory? In terms of strength, how could she possibly compete with Fairy Wu Yu? Thus Li Man secretly tugged Su Lu's sleeve, signaling her not to be careless. How could this small action escape the eyes of Fairy Wu Yu? She laughed out loud. Little girl, listen to your friend's advice. You can't compete with me. Su Luo smiled. Not necessarily. Young calves really aren't afraid of tigers. Fairy Wu Yu sneered condescendingly. Oh, so Fairy Wu Yu is a tigress? My respects. Su Luo cupped her hand. How could such a derogatory term as tigress be used to describe the holy Fairy Wu Yu? Fairy Wu Yu's breath was held in her throat by Su Luo's bet, up and down, so angry that her fists clenched tightly. Chapter 22:20. Exultation. 8. So, what kind of bet does Fairy Wu Yu want to place? Su Luo replied with a faint smile. Fairy Wu Yu's eyes swept to Lin Hanli at the side. Lin Hanli thought for a moment and quickly took out a bead that shone like a glowing star. 7 in total, each as big as a pigeon's egg, blood red, magnificent and bright. This was the legendary 7 stars pearl. Lin Hanli said to Su Luo, "This is the 7 stars pearl. If they are inlaid on a weapon, they will make the weapon more powerful." Su Luo looked at the 7 stars pearl while a bright gleam flashed across her eyes. This was really like when people sent you a pillow when you wanted to sleep. Su Luo was truly in love with that treasure. People knew the Cheng-Ying sword was Su Luo's best weapon. It was still an adequately useful weapon before. However, with the continuous improvement of Su Luo's strength, this sword had gradually been unable to keep up with her strength. Su Luo knew there was such a thing as inlays, but she had yet to find a suitable one to use. And now, Lin Hanli just sent it to her door. She was naturally overjoyed. Hey, this 7 stars pearl is not yours yet. Why are you laughing so happily? Fairy Wu Yu didn't want to see Su Luo's joyful expression, as if she were a mouse that had spotted some rice. Su Luo gave a cough and swept Lin Hanli a glance. Make sure to take care of my treasure, and you better don't lose it. Otherwise, when the time comes, you will be the only one I'll question. The surrounding people burst out laughing. Fairy Wu Yu looked at Su Luo as though she was looking at an idiot. Did Su Luo really think that this treasure is hers? Dream on. This 7 stars pearl was so precious that even she, Fairy Wu Yu, couldn't just take it out anyhow she liked. Lin Hanli risked his life exploring the Devil's Cave to get it, and gave it to Fairy Wu Yu as a birthday gift. Fairy Wu Yu narrowed her eyes and raised her red lips into an arrogant sneer. What about you? What will you take out as a bet? If you don't have a treasure of equal value, you'll be the butt of everyone's laughter. Su Luo laughed at this. When Fairy Wu Yu said she wanted to place a bet, Su Luo searched up and down her space, ready to find any treasures that were in hand. The wind and fire wheels? This thing was not as valuable as the 7 stars pearl. The sky-piercing whistle? Still not as valuable. Intelligent skull or strength arm bone was good enough. But Su Luo did not want to take it out in fear of attracting people's jealousy. Oh, that's right. Su Luo's finger moved, and in the next instant, a pitch-black shield appeared in Su Luo's hand. Looking at this shield, many people subconsciously held their breath. This shield looked so familiar. Oh. This was clearly the wooing shield that Lan Yingyan used yesterday. In the past, the wooing shield was blue in color, but now it was black like ink. It was difficult to distinguish from the color, but the shape and power were exactly the same as before. At this moment, many people looked at Fairy Wu Yu. With Su Luo using this as her bet, it was like hitting Fairy Wu Yu's face, because this originally belonged to Fairy Wu Yu. Seeing this shield, Fairy Wu Yu was so angry that all of her orifices were spewing steam to the point of making her collapse from holding them in. What? Does Fairy Wu Yu think that this shield is not valuable enough and incapable of matching up to your status? Su Luo gave a knowing smile in return. Her words were a pun, which made it difficult for Fairy Wu Yu to respond. Chapter 22-21, Sudden Fame 1. If Fairy Wu Yu said that the value was not enough, then, with her sending out this shield in the previous duel, why would she even carry it around if it doesn't even match her status? Fairy Wu Yu was really frustrated in her heart as to whether this shield could be used as a bet, as this was equivalent to gambling with herself with her own things. If she was to win, she won't be able to win anything. If she loses, she would even lose the 7 stars pearl. Who would have thought that Su Luo, this vile wench, was that cunning? This shield originally belonged to Wu Yu and you just picked it up. You should return it to its rightful owner. How could you keep it for yourself? Lin Hanli frowned and reprimanded Su Luo with the tone of a senior. With such a good opening, all the men who closely followed Fairy Wu Yu proceeded to berate Su Luo. Do you know you should always return other people's property back to their rightful owners? You dare to pick up things from Fairy Wu Yu? Are you tired of living? Just say it if you want to die. Don't be so subtle. Su Luo curled his lips with indifference. Is this shield Fairy Wu Yu's? If so, please summon it back. Fairy Wu Yu. Su Luo was at ease, as though she consciously wished for the latter to take it away if she could. Fairy Wu Yu was infuriated. At that time, she had lifted the blood contract and gave the Wu Ying shield to Lan Yingyan. How can I summon it back now? Seeing Fairy Wu Yu being stifled with anger, Su Luo shot a sneer. Didn't Fairy Wu Yu give the shield to Lan Yingyan? In front of everyone's eyes. Fairy Wu Yu cannot deny that, right? Lan Yingyan was my person, Fairy Wu Yu said with a tone devoid of shame. No. On the contrary, Lan Yingyan's life was mine. Su Luo smiled faintly. The life or death stage decides one's life or death. Therefore, I don't need to bear any responsibility if I reap his life. Do you think I'm right, Fairy Wu Yu? What she said was right, yet also wrong. Although Fairy Wu Yu was very reluctant, she couldn't point out what was wrong either. Since Lan Yingyan's life was mine, it could be proved by the same reason that this Wu Ying shield naturally belongs to me. Do you all have any further objections? Su Luo swept an indifferent gaze across her surroundings. There was silence all around. Fairy Wu Yu had already lost halfway, even before the start of the gamble. Do you dare to bet? Su Luo used the same provocative technique on Fairy Wu Yu. She was bound to win the 7 stars pearl. Fairy Wu Yu sneered. Since you dare, why couldn't this fairy? Let's bet. In truth, she was forcefully suppressing her anger back down, because even if she were to win, she would only win back her own item. She also knew that Su Luo had taken out the shield not just for the sole reason to piss her off. What Su Luo said just now was plain and clear for all to understand. She had taken Lan Yin's life without paying any price. Those words Su Luo said were meant for everyone. In fact, even the Eighth Elder could hear what she meant. With her speaking this matter plainly and clearly, even the Eighth Elder would have to consider his words if he were to speak out. Fairy Wu Yu looked at Su Luo's eyes and noticed they were sparkling with a chilling glow. She thought Su Luo was just a tiny, weak ant, but who knew that she was, in fact, a stinging bee? Nevertheless, it was really hateful that Su Luo put her in a disadvantageous situation. Therefore, Fairy Wu Yu made up her mind. She would teach Su Luo, this vile wench, a good lesson, and let her see how great she was. In front of everyone, there was no need to look for witnesses. Thus the two parties agreed on their bet. At this moment, the Eighth Elder arrived, walking at a leisurely pace. Seeing that everyone was already present, the Eighth Elder didn't waste any words and announced directly. See these targets placed in the shape of a picture? What you have to do is very simple, is to pass through the target with a stroke. Chapter 22-22, Sudden Fame 2, Eighth Elder. What do you mean by penetrating all targets with one shot? Everyone, including Fairy Wu Yu, was at a loss, causing them to raise questions one after the other. A mysterious light flashed through the eyes of the Eighth Elder as he pointed at the targets and said, "To be more specific, you all have to use the method of quickly extracting flame energy that you all have learned in class just now, to form the energy into filaments and penetrate these targets. However, do note that the filamentous flame energy is like a pen. You can use this pen to draw all the pictures based on the figures I put out without removing your hands. However, you cannot go through the same line that you've drawn." Everyone only had a smattering of understanding after the Elder's explanation, but Su Luo had managed to comprehend all of it immediately. Hey, wasn't this a one-stroke puzzle game that was once popular in modern times? The game would get more difficult as the stages progressed, coupled with something like 2 lines or so. The Eighth Elder swept an indifferent gaze across the class. Does everyone understand? The sound of everyone's reply was low, lacking confidence. Contrasting with everyone else was Fairy Wu Yu. At that moment, her face was filled with a beaming smile that was bursting with confidence. When she looked at Su Luo, her eyes were full of provocation. Su Luo smiled faintly and ignored her. Fairy Wu Yu snorted coldly. "You wench, you'd better not cry when you suffer an utterly miserable loss. Then how about letting our Fairy Wu Yu give a demonstration to all of us, so we can see how many targets Fairy Wu Yu can pass through?" Each target was equivalent to a point in a drawing. Su Luo looked at the pictures set by the Eighth Elder. The pictures put out by the Eighth Elder were really not simple. The last few strokes of those drawings, which were the equivalent of the last few passes, were of extremely high difficulty. There were a total of 72 points here. God knew how many passes Fairy Wu Yu could hold on through. Fairy Wu Yu walked forward, and her appearance attracted the attention of the audience. She silently calculated the figures and numbers on the next court. After pondering for a while, everyone looked on as she stepped down and condensed her spiritual energy into her dantian. As she waved her hands, a bright yellow flame appeared in her right palm. In actuality, there were 2 points being tested in this assessment. The first point was to extract the flame energy and draw it into a filament shape. The second point was to control the filamentary fire energy to pass through the targets with precise calculations. As the placement of the targets wasn't arranged in accordance with a pattern, how difficult would it be to make it in one go and pass it with one stroke? At this time, everyone's eyes were focused on the flame in Fairy Wu Yu's palm. Through energy compression, the flame was stretched, turning slender and appearing just like dough being stretched and pulled to form noodles. However, because the hole of the target was really too small, only the size of the eye of a needle, Fairy Wu Yu was still constantly drawing the flames thinner like a wire. Soon, the flame became thinner than a thread of silk, before proceeding to pierce through the targets. A human form started to appear from the target's Fairy Wu Yu had passed through. There was a head and neck, a body, hands and legs. In this case, where should she start? Not only Fairy Wu Yu, but the other people watching were also quickly thinking about this issue, pointing to the human-shaped target one by one, calculating silently in their hearts as they did. However, from the look of their frowning brows and furrowed foreheads, all of them seemed to be unable to come up with any good solutions. Chapter 22. Give you the position of concubine 1. At this time, a few people were already sitting in the main hall. Sitting at the most honored position was none other than the Crown Prince Su Luo had encountered yesterday Nangong Liujue. He seemed to like the color yellow. Today he was dressed in a yellow brocade robe, patterned with 6 golden dragons that ferociously bared their fangs and brandished their claws. The Crown Prince was wearing a flat rectangular crown with 9 tassels. Each tassel was composed of a golden string threaded through with small silver pearls. The light from the tasseled crown revealed a wild, frivolous, and tyrannical face. His lips were puckered as if sucking on something sour, and his nose was hooked like an eagle's beak. His seemingly calm gaze at a sharp eagle-like deadly edge. From the beginning, his pair of matchless, indifferent eyes never glanced at Su Luo. It was as if just glancing at Su Luo would dirty his honorable eyes. Holding a cup of fragrant tea, his posture was elegant and noble. Perfectly composed, he coolly sipped the fragrant tea with a lofty attitude and indifferent demeanor. Sitting beside him at a lower seating was Great General Su Zian. This was the first time Su Luo saw the father of her body's original owner. She only saw a 40-year or so person covered in an ink-colored robe who had a cold and frigid expression. This person gave off a piercing, imposing, and detached aura, especially his stern eyes that contained an endless harsh chilliness. He turned his severe, imposing face and shouted at Su Luo. "How can you be so lacking in manners? Why aren't you saluting the Crown Prince?" At this time, Sushi had already sweetly given the proper ceremonial salute to the Crown Prince. She had already intimately walked to the Crown Prince's side, affectionately and sweetly saying Crown Prince brother this and Crown Prince that. The Crown Prince lifted his eyes. A dismissing glance landed on Su Luo's face. He indifferently asked, "You are Su Luo?" To be honest, the girl standing in front of him didn't look too bad. Clothed in a white butterfly muslin gown that swept the floor, which showed off her shapely figure, ink-black hair tied with a light purple ribbon, and a few strands of escaped hair playfully draped across her shoulder. Her face, devoid of cosmetics, was so fresh that it was even moving. Su Luo softly replied, "Yes." Her clear voice was calm and collected, cold and agile, with not a single superfluous word. She bravely held the Crown Prince's gaze with her dark iris that looked like dotted ink. The Crown Prince slightly frowned, because Su Luo's eyes were too pure and too bright. The gaze that was as pure as water seemed to be like a blinding light that could instantly see through all the secrets hidden in his heart. The Crown Prince sulked, silently taking her measure, and tightly wrinkled his forehead. As his hands held the teacup, his mouth hooked up into a nefarious sneer. "Because of you, this king has been ridiculed for more than 10 years. Tell me, what sort of punishment do you deserve?" She never thought that this Crown Prince would be so unscrupulous and shameless. He was ridiculed by others for more than 10 years, but what did that have to do with her? He even threw all the blame onto her. If it was the past weak and powerless Su Luo, then this matter would have been dropped. But would the current Su Luo suffer such a loss? Obviously not. Su Luo coldly smiled. "Then may I ask the Crown Prince, back then was it Su Manor who pushed for this engagement? Obviously, it was your dear Queen Mother who saw Su Manor's fourth Mrs. Good Omen and hastily decided on the engagement, for fear that Su Luo would be stolen by others. If you want to find a culprit to blame, then you should go look for the Queen. Why are you looking for me?" This is like picking up soft persimmons and nitpicking it for being soft. Did he really believe that she would not rebel? Su Luo. The color on Su Zian's face began to change as he violently shouted, "What's wrong with this girl? She didn't have such courage before, and every time she saw the crown prince, she would be submissive and could barely breath. Now she even dared to talk back to the crown prince? Who gave her this right? The crown prince's mouth curved into a cold smile as a pair of beautiful piercing eyes held a deep iciness and austerity. Shrew his sharp mouth, a crafty and skillfully argued speech, and every word spoken is vulgar and rude. Chapter 23. Give you the position of concubine too. Su Luo's laugh was joyful and sunny. Crown Prince is saying that the Crown Prince is wise with amazing martial arts, speaks with eloquence, distinguished and carefree, never picks on others, never bully the weak, and never use power to oppress the people. How could this subject even compare? The Crown Prince's brow wrinkled slightly as his eyes filled with annoyance and another bone-chilling coldness. He carelessly played with the thumb ring on his finger and shot a smile that was not quite a smile at Su Zian, and said, "The great general really did educate such great daughter. She really knows how to praise this king. This king really admires that." Although his words sounded like praise, those words were like a sharp sword that brutally stabbed toward great General Su's chest. Su Zian's complexion changed as he waved his hands towards Su Luo and angrily thundered, "Why are you not quickly apologizing to the Crown Prince?" Su Luo revealed a terrified expression, and at the same time, looked despondent. She glanced at the raised hand, raised her small palm-sized face, innocently asked, "Father, is daughter's praise of the Crown Prince wrong? Is the Crown Prince not wise with amazing martial arts? Not eloquent in speech? Not distinguished and carefree?" Are you implying that the Crown Prince picks on others, bully the weak, and oppress the people? Su Zian's face darkened a little bit after each sentence Su Luo uttered, until the very end when his face could be described as being covered by a dense black cloud. It could be said that every word Su Luo used, if alone, was correct but put together, it had the opposite meaning. This was Su Luo playing words games. How could Su Zian, a military man, win against her, who was an experienced veteran? At this time, Su Luo snorted in her heart. Break off the engagement? Even though this lady also wants to break off the engagement, this lady is still in a bad mood because you were the one who mentioned it. You wanted to break this engagement, but do you think it'll just break like that because you wanted to break? Clap, clap, clap. The Crown Prince suddenly stood up and steadily, step by step, slowly walked to Su Luo's side. His condescending manner, eyes full of nefarious light, looked at her up and down. While carrying an evil and callous atmosphere, a touch of interest suddenly flashed in his gaze. Outside of his expectations, Su Luo indifferently stared back at him. But Su Luo's heart secretly became more alert. This Crown Prince was suspicious and capricious. If she mishandled him, then she will suffer a loss. How amusing. This is really interesting. The Crown Prince suddenly started to laugh loudly. He turned towards Su Zian and said, "Great General Su, this king did not speak wrongly. You really did raise an interesting daughter." What could Su Zian possibly say? He could only laugh along with the Crown Prince. In the end, whatever the Crown Prince says would always be right. Su Shi and Su Jingyu's expression changed in an instant. What does the Crown Prince mean? He praised Su Luo as amusing and looked at her with interest. Could it be that this engagement won't be canceled? Although Su Luo's heart was secretly on guard, she was still confident about her judgment. Regarding the Crown Prince's feminine and viscous type of person, he was only interested in what benefited him. He would never give up Su Shi, a piece of fat meat that was about to reach his mouth, on account of Su Luo. At this moment, Su Jingyu took a step forward. His tone was a bit gloomy as he said, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince." The Crown Prince waved his hands, revealing that faint half-smile, and that flirtatious, threatening, yet matchless handsome countenance. "This king understand your meaning. Rest assured, today this engagement will be cancelled." But he condescendingly said to Su Luo, "You must really want to marry this king, right? This king is not that unreasonable. I can give you a chance right now." Su Luo coldly threw him a glance as she secretly laughed in her heart. The crown prince nobly sat down on the luxurious soft cushion and arrogantly continued. If you can answer the question asked by this king promises you to give you the position of concubine. Chapter 22-24. Sudden Fame 4. Li Man Man tugged on Su Luo's sleeve and whispered, "This really is very hard. You can't even see through the target holes with your eyes. You'd better be careful." Su Luo smiled faintly and nodded her head. At this point, everyone in the class had already done the test, with Su Luo being the last one left. The results for this assessment had also been released, with the first position undoubtedly belonging to Fairy Wu Yu. As for second place, that person's score was not far off from Fairy Wu Yu's. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on Su Luo. It seems like the first position will be Fairy Wu Yu's this time around. The first place ranker will get special privileges. There is still Su Luo left. Why are you jumping to conclusions? There isn't even a need to compare. Don't you know this by now? Fairy Wu Yu is the strongest one in our class. Exactly. As for that Su Luo, even though she isn't bad, how could she possibly match up to our Fairy Wu Yu? I predict that she can only go through 20 bullseyes tops. I respect her a little bit more than you, so I predict that she will go through 30 bullseyes. What? 30? How is that even possible? Almost everyone thought that no one else could beat Fairy Wu Yu's record, with her first place ranking being untouchable by anyone. Under the pessimistic atmosphere coming from everyone in the class, Su Luo slowly went over to the field and quietly stood there. She did not start immediately upon arriving in place. Instead, raising her brows, she proceeded to look serenely at the bullseyes in front of her. Su Luo had extreme confidence in the energy capacity of her fallen Red Lotus. So the first problem of having insufficient energy capacity, which everyone faced, wasn't a problem at all for her. The current problem she faced was the formulation of a method she would need to employ in order to draw the entire human shape from start to finish with a single thread. Su Luo sighed silently in her heart. What a shame. She had yet to fuse with the wisdom skull bone. If not, she would have been able to formulate a strategy. Su Luo stood in front of the targets, her eyes looking straight ahead, her body standing as stiff as a machine, while she appeared as though she was daydreaming. In reality, Su Luo was actually daydreaming, as her soul had already left her body and moved into her spatial ring to use her communication amulet to contact Nangong Luyan. She could only figure out how to pass through 65 targets. Even though she could beat Fairy Wu Yu like that, she didn't feel satisfied to achieve a win like that. While Su Luo was talking to Nangong Luyan through the communication amulet, all the people present were staring at her. Why is she standing there like a wooden log? Could it be that she's turned herself into an idiot by thinking too hard? There's a time limit to this assessment, with everyone given a joystick's worth of time to do so. The joystick is already burnt down to half its length, and that Su Luo is really still standing there like an idiot? Is this her way of giving up? Upon seeing the state that Su Yu was in, Fairy Wu Yu felt extremely delighted. Raising her chin, she shot a look filled with disdain towards the former. Haha, you want to fight me? Let's see how you die this time. Despite being the focus of everyone's gaze, Su Luo continued to remain indifferent. Compared to her, Li Man Man, who was standing next to her, was so nervous that she was sweating profusely, all while pulling Su Luo lightly time after time. At this point, the eighth elder's expression had already turned ugly. His eyes were as deep as the ocean. Just when there was only a third of the joystick left, Su Luo's conversation with Nangong Luyan finally came to an end. As expected, Nangong Luyan only took a little bit of time to find the solution to the problem that troubled Su Luo. He merely needed to think for a split second before being able to precisely calculate the path Su Luo would need to take, making her admire him even more. His mind works even faster than a computer. No wonder why he is so sly. Su Luo mumbled quietly to herself. When she lifted up her head, she saw. By the time he finished speaking, he had already disappeared from where he originally stood. Believing what he said, Fairy Wu Yu let out a sigh of relief. She understood Yin Zhao's plan, and she felt that he did a good job. Inwardly, Lin Banley was upset. It was a pity that such an opportunity to do something for Fairy Wu Yu was snatched away by the silent Yin Zhao. At this moment, almost everyone in the audience was watching Su Luo's dragon-like flames, so no one noticed the incense that was about to burn out. A gust of wind suddenly shot towards the incense. "Not good! The incense is about to burn out!" someone exclaimed. Chapter 22-27 Sudden Fame 7 Suddenly, everyone's eyes looked towards the incense. If the incense were to go out, it would mean that time was up, and Su Luo would leave this game with only deep regret. Just as the blade of wind approached the incense, a ball of flame burst out, flying fiercely towards the wind blade. With a cracking sound, the wind blade was intercepted and fell apart, and the flames flared up into the sky. When everyone saw that cluster of flames, their eyes seemed about to fall out. Wasn't this flame the same element as the flame that was being controlled over there? Was Su Luo able to control the flames to hit the bullseyes, while still having room to protect the incense? At this moment, everyone stared at Su Luo with shock, while the others were panting and sweating, trying to control the flames to hit the targets. Only Su Luo still remained calm and relaxed, her mind untroubled, without sweating, and she hadn't even frowned once. 50, 52, 54. Subconsciously, people started counting how many bullseyes Su Luo's flames pierced through. At this point, Fairy Wu Yu's complexion was so obscure that it seemed as if water could drip out, gloomy and dark like a clouded sky. "It's almost there, almost there. She's close to surpassing the 56 marks of Fairy Wu Yu. Just push a bit farther." There were some who couldn't help but yell. There were a few people who voiced their agreement with this sentence. Even if Fairy Wu Yu wanted to retaliate, she couldn't take it out on the crowd, as she couldn't find out which people were doing so. At this moment, all eyes were fixed on the flames, and all of them were becoming excited over this, as if they were the ones controlling the flames, and they became extremely solemn in their concentration, holding their breaths. There was a slight smile in Su Luo's eyes as she controlled the flames to quickly move forwards. 56. Fairy Wu Yu's record is broken. It's broken. Fairy Wu Yu has lost. Someone reveled. Fairy Wu Yu lost? This was unthinkable for almost everyone because in their minds, Fairy Wu Yu had always been infinitely elevated above all others, and she was always ranked first in the class. But now, Su Luo had actually surpassed her. Quickly look, Su Luo is still going. No one knew who shouted this out, but everyone's attention became focused on Su Luo once again. 58, 62, 65. Damn, is Su Luo really thinking of making it through all of the bullseyes? Can't she let the rest of us have some room to breath? Human nature was a very strange thing. If Su Luo had surpassed them only a little bit, then they would be jealous and dissatisfied. But now that Su Luo was so much better than them, they knew they could only look up to her. So they all began to admire and idolize Su Luo. 68, 70, 72. The incense is almost burnt out. Hurry, hurry up. Someone glanced at the incense and became anxious, so much so that their throat was about to become hoarse from screaming. He was more worked up than the contestants themselves. It was a case of the emperor being not in a hurry, but rather the eunuchs were the ones filled with anxiety. These people almost stomped their feet out of agitation, while Su Luo still remained calm, going at her leisure, the flame she was controlling flying forward at a constant speed. 74, 76. In the midst of a last wave of cheering, the incense finally burned out, completing its mission in history. At this moment, everyone turned and fixed their gazes upon Su Luo, causing her to feel somewhat embarrassed. Chapter 22-28. Sudden Fame 8. Ahem. Su Luo laughed. Fortunately, it was just an accidental success. She was so confident before, but now she said it had been an accidental success? The crowd felt ashamed on behalf of Su Luo. At this moment, Su Luo turned around and walked in front of Fairy Wu Yu, her steps not too slow yet not too fast, but every step she took seemed to hit Fairy Wu Yu's heart heavily. Fairy Wu Yu's hand clenched into a fist. Her face turned red as she stared at Su Luo, glaring at her with angry and dangerous eyes. In contrast to Fairy Wu Yu, Su Luo was wearing a long plain dress. Her entire body was bare of any accessories, and she simply wore two long plain belts that swayed in the wind at her waist. But at this moment, she exuded a stronger aura than Fairy Wu Yu, who had countless ornaments all over her body. Fairy Wu Yu glared at Su Luo like a ferocious wolf, but under her angry gaze, Su Luo didn't even spare her a glance. Instead, she actually reached out and pushed away Fairy Wu Yu, who was standing in front of her. "Where are my 7 stars, Pearl?" Su Luo looked at Lin Hanli with a smirk. Lin Hanli turned his head to look at Fairy Wu Yu. But at this moment, Fairy Wu Yu was still dumbfounded and hadn't come back to her senses yet. She was now immersed in the fact that she had been pushed away by Su Luo, and looking at that disoriented and disbelieving look on her face, one could tell that she still hadn't come out of her daze. "Wu Yu?" Lin Hanli glared at Su Luo fiercely, but looked at Fairy Wu Yu with a tender and doting gaze. This soft call of her name pulled the shocked Fairy Wu Yu back into reality. Fairy Wu Yu raised her head, her eyes looking towards Su Luo, and she raised her hand. Just as she was about to slap Su Luo, she found that her hand was being held by someone, and that person was none other than Su Luo herself. The 1-year period. Has Fairy Wu Yu forgotten it? Su Luo smiled, cunning as a fox. Of course, if Fairy Wu Yu wants to make a move now, it's not that it's impossible, but senior brother Luo's bet will have to be cancelled. Fairy Wu Yu had promised not to make any moves towards Su Luo within a 1-year period. Fairy Wu Yu was so angry that she nearly gnashed her teeth. She had made a bet, yet she had gotten herself involved in it. Fairy Wu Yu stared viciously at Su Luo and gritted her teeth. "You want to cancel the bet? Don't even think about it." Saying this, she yanked back her hand. Su Luo smiled faintly. She bet right. To Wu Yu it was imperative to have senior brother Luo. Su Luo's eyes flashed with a dark and dull light. If Fairy Wu Yu insisted on making a move now, Su Luo was certain that Fairy Wu Yu's chances of winning were over 99%. In terms of real strength, the current Su Luo really wasn't Fairy Wu Yu's opponent. Unfortunately, she had chosen a 1-year arrangement. One year was enough to change many things, including Su Luo's strength. Su Luo's eyes curved up into a cunning smile, her gaze fixed on Lin Hanli with the right palm of her hand stretched out. Even if she was asking for the stakes in a bet, Su Luo's aura and attitude still seemed very calm and relaxed. The 7 stars pearl. Lin Hanli really couldn't bear to give it away. He had risked his life and obtained the 7 stars pearls after almost dying 9 times, and he had originally wanted to give it to Wu Yu. Give it to her? Fairy Wu Yu hatefully spit out this sentence. "This broken iron and copper. You think I care about these?" She is shallow-eyed and thinks they are good things. Give it to her. Hurry up and give it to her. This broken iron, shallow-eyed, thought they were good. Lin Hanli was almost crying. That was his entire heart and soul. His heart was about to break. That you're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.